Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. This is all about members insurance. So I just want to thank Mike for doing this for us, and I'm just gonna pass it off to him. And if you have any questions, just please drop them in the chat box at the bottom corner of the screen, or just save them till the end and we'll ask if anybody has any questions. Okay, thank you. Take it away, Mike.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. Just for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Mike King. I'm a partner at CapriCMW Insurance. I also am the national manager for all of the program we do for the equine industry from coast to coast, and fortunate to have been in that sort of position since 1998. So it's going to be quite a long time that Capri and now CapriCMW and myself have been actively involved in providing various risk management and insurance products to members of the provincial equine associations like Horse Council. And of course, it did all start in BC way back when. And one of the fundamental reasons why these programs exist and why they continue to exist today is because of the inevitable questions that come up about ownership of horses or being participants in an industry that involves or interacts with a 1,000-pound animal and all of those wonderful things that go along with that, and in some circumstances, scary things. So the insurance programming that we put together and modified over these decades is really a reflection of the needs that are being expressed to us by that equine community. So I'll go through the various products that are part of the membership. Then we'll talk about some of the other insurance products that Horse Council and the other provinces offer to their members as options through us, and then we'll take some questions from whoever's in the room to try and help explain what is sometimes a complicated issue. So without further ado, there's two products that are included in the membership with Horse Council, and the one that we certainly speak about 90% of the time or 85% of the time when we're talking to equine community members across the country is the liability insurance. The liability insurance is provided automatically in the membership, is a $5 million policy per member that protects the member for liability that could be imposed upon them by a third party because the horse they own, lease, borrow, use has caused bodily injury or property damage to someone or something else. The easiest example is your horse kicks me and I decide to sue you. That's an easy example of bodily injury and a claim that we have seen numerous times over the years. Not necessarily a kick, but a bite or some interaction with the horse that wasn't anticipated that has injured someone else. And that injured person takes it upon themselves to seek a legal action against the owner of the horse, and it would be the liability policy that would respond. Similarly, a sort of an easy example of property damage. Your horse gets out on the road from the boarding place or gets away from you from the farm, gets out on the road and gets hit by a car, God forbid. And again, regrettably, each year we suffer the consequences, or we hear about situations across the country where horses have escaped and have a tendency to stand around on the on the road and regrettably interact with cars. Clearly, you can imagine that hitting an animal of this size inevitably causes damage to the car, might very well injure the occupants of the car, and there's simply no question that the owner of the horse is going to be named as a defendant, perhaps the only defendant in the action from the plaintiff or the claimant to be compensated for their loss, that property damage or bodily injury. So again, a $5 million policy is in place for members of Horse Council, and it covers you, the member, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It doesn't matter where you keep your horse, whether it's at home or at a boarding place. Doesn't matter how many horses you own. We certainly have lots and lots of folks who are multiple horse owners. What does matter is that the horse that is involved in that claim is being used for personal purposes and is not a commercial horse. So a commercial horse would be a horse that has been acquired for the express purposes of earning an income from things like trail riding or teamster sort of things, or perhaps a commercial pony ride operator who has a fleet of animals that are used in that business. Those are commercial use horses and are not covered by that horse council membership policy. Horse showing generally is not considered a commercial activity. So for those that are fortunate enough to actually make a bit of money, even if it's very minor at horse shows, and certainly I did that as a young person, and I don't ever remember actually making money at a horse show, but I can certainly remember winning a bit of money. But even that is considered a personal endeavor. It's not considered commercial, and to that end is a covered horse, as it were, under the program. The questions that often come up from the liability perspective are things like, if I let someone else ride my horse and they are injured as a result of riding my horse and they decide to sue me, am I covered? And the answer is yes. And that's a great example of that horse interacting with someone else and potentially causing harm to them. They fall off, they get injured. They come after you and say, you should have told me that this horse was a bucking, wild, crazy, three-legged, one-armed bandit. And so I'm suing you for the injury I sustained while riding your horse. So what we suggest, obviously, is that if you're going to let others ride your horse, that you encourage them, if not mandate of them, that they too become a member of Horse Council, which does a couple of things. First, it gets them involved in the community. It makes them commit a little bit more to the community that you're involved in as a horse owner. It might give them pause to think this is not necessarily a frivolous activity that they're about to embark on by riding your horse. But just as importantly is the other component that I'm about to talk about in the membership insurance program, and that's the accident, death, and dismemberment policy that is also embedded in the membership that's automatically provided each time you renew your policy. But before we get to the AD&D policy, we'll talk a little bit more about liability. So this policy covers you worldwide, meaning to say that if you horse show in the United States, or if you are lucky enough to travel with your horse to another jurisdiction, Alberta or somewhere else, that you're definitely covered if the horse should cause a problem in those environs. It doesn't have to be at home. It doesn't have to be at the boarding place, which is often a question we receive. And again, it's about what the horse does. You can't sue the horse. So as the owner of the horse, inevitably the lawsuit will be directed at you. So having that membership liability policy is a great benefit of membership. It's not the only benefit of membership, and we'll talk about some of the other great things that Horse Council is doing perhaps at the end. So without further ado, the other included product in the membership is this AD&D, or accident, death, and dismemberment policy. It has what we call a principal sum limit of $30,000, so a fairly high limit for the activity. And what that policy does intentionally is respond to catastrophic or permanent injuries or death, God forbid, that arises from an interaction with a horse. Again, we're talking about a 1,000-pound animal that it can do very unpredictable things from time to time, causing very serious injuries to the rider or to the person that the horse is interacting with. And so this $30,000 accident, death, and dismemberment policy is there if that sort of catastrophic injury does arise. So the way that AD&D policies work is we've got this principal sum, so that's sort of the starting point. And there's a schedule or a list of benefits that are paid depending on what the injury is that are related to that $30,000. So that's why it's called a principal sum. So in the case of death, again, we hope that that doesn't happen ever, but it regrettably does happen from time to time. The amount paid to the estate is $30,000. So that's the maximum benefit. For circumstances that lead to catastrophic and permanent injury, things like paraplegia or quadriplegia, it's actually 2 times the principal sum. So it's a multiple of that principal sum. For other injuries, which are no doubt very, very serious and permanent injuries, it would be a portion of $30,000. So loss of sight, loss of hearing, loss of use of a single arm or leg, loss of use of a hand, and those sorts of things are all listed injuries because, again, they're certainly considered catastrophic and obviously very permanent. And so they would pay a derivative of that 30,000, depending on what that injury is. And we call that a schedule of benefits. We do put some examples up on the information sheets that I believe are on Horse Council's website. Certainly on our website, there is a schedule that shows some of the injury payment lines on that AD&D policy. What the policy doesn't do, and this is again to the sort of the questions that we receive a lot about the AD&D policy that's included, and that is, I've fallen off the horse, I've broken my arm, I've broken my leg, I smashed a tooth, I've suffered an injury. Does the AD&D policy pay? And the answer is no. Those injuries are not considered permanent, notwithstanding the fact they may be quite serious, but they're not considered permanent injuries and are not paid, or there's no benefit provided through that included AD&D component. There is an optional AD&D policy that is available to members that enhances that principal sum limit from 30,000 actually to 80,000. In that optional AD&D add-on, which is on the membership walkthrough and the membership process application and so on from the membership, for the annual membership, there is then a benefit for fracture and a benefit for dental injuries. Not huge sums, I won't lie to anyone on the call, but there is nonetheless a payment. For the dental injuries, the maximum the policy will pay is 5,000. For a fracture, the maximum or that principal sum, again, is a 7,500 limit. And depending on which bone is broken, there's again a schedule or a list of bones that might be broken or fractured, and the amount that is paid. And in some cases, frankly, it's a very small amount. It was never intended to be a sort of a catch-all or a way for people to potentially receive a huge benefit, but it's nonetheless there. And over time, certainly the policy has had to respond and pay out on a number of occasions. So it is very, very, very beneficial for members to consider the option, as well as with the knowledge that they've got that basic policy already embedded in their membership. So those are so again, the included components are that liability policy, is sort of that big nut of $5 million plus $30,000 of AD&D coverage. That certainly serves the purpose or serves the needs of frankly, the majority of members. But over time, we've seen an increase of people that are trying to take advantage, or are not trying to, but are indeed taking advantage of that optional AD&D component to enhance the coverage so that they receive a larger benefit if they suffer a catastrophic injury, and then have the benefit of fracture and dental coverage along the way. In those two AD&D policies, I should also mention that there are expenses that are related to crutches and physiotherapy and chiropractic work that might be necessitated or might become necessary as a result of the injury being suffered. Ambulance costs are often things that we see which are not paid for by government health, by BC Health. So those sorts of expenses, out-of-pocket expenses, are typically paid by the AD&D policy when the injury itself is a covered event. So there is some extra things that are included in that, and I would encourage all of you to read what you can on Horse Council's website to see what those lists are, to see if it makes sense for you as an individual. So those are sort of the core products, if you will. Several years ago, after we had these core products in the marketplace for, frankly, about 20 years, we added some other optional policies to the program. And the one, again, really in order of just what I see that comes across my desk, is the members named perils policy. So now we're talking about a life insurance policy effectively for the horse or any horse that is owned by the member, that will pay out on the life of the animal if it should die as a result of, again, a list of perils or named perils that are listed in the document. And those perils or causes of death that are covered are limited to external cause, things like fire and lightning and collapse of a building, and transport is certainly covered. Entrapment is covered. Accidental shooting is covered, which regrettably happens every fall somewhere across the country. Someone will mistake a horse across a paddock in the foggy, misty morning as being a deer or a moose. Attacked by wild animals is a covered peril. Again, that does happen in many rural parts of our country from time to time. So the named perils are fairly broad. Certainly given the cost of the policy, which is very inexpensive, and the total limit that can be paid, and it is limited to up to a maximum of $10,000 for any one horse that is lost as a result of one of these perils. So it's an alternative to perhaps a full mortality policy, which we also sell and is available in the marketplace generally. That is a much broader sort of life insurance policy for horses that covers all of those named perils, but much more, including medical losses. So on the members named perils policy, the policy that's available through Horse Council as an option, there's no coverage for things like colic or disease. And that's a question that we get a lot. We just can't underwrite the policy in this environment at that cost. I think it's $15, and Jocelyn or Linda, you'll have to correct me at the end if I'm wrong, but I believe it's $15 for that option. So you can imagine that for $15, the insuring company is looking for a list of perils that are quite clear and quite clean that people buy knowingly and take that risk on. So again, it's an option that we felt was worth offering to the community, given that many people have multiple animals. So we don't have to list the horses in this case. We don't care how old the horse is because we're not insuring against natural causes of death like age. We don't really care about the health of the horse, although there's a presumption that the horse is healthy, because again, we're not covering sickness as one of the perils. It's really well suited for horses that are living outside, which certainly is the case in many parts of the country, which is a good thing for horses, but that are in environments that perhaps are a little more risky, where they might suffer the consequences of a lightning strike, or as I said, entrapment or attack by a wild animal, and other things that are relevant to being in that environment. So the members named perils is a great option for folks to consider. If they have multiple horses, you buy it once, you don't buy it per horse. First loss is paid, you get one loss per year. It's pretty simple and straightforward, and a pretty easy and good investment for a very low sum. Beyond that policy, the other policy that we should speak to is something called Weekly Accident Indemnity, or WAI, which is a product we offered, I think, 4, 5, 6 years ago, maybe now, to the community. It's intended to be an income replacement policy or income supplement policy if someone suffers an injury and can't work. COVID was not a covered risk, just so that people know. But the intent of the policy is to assist those folks in the community that suffer an injury and are unable to earn income for a period of time. This is basically a short-term disability type of policy. There's a cap on it. The maximum the policy will pay is $500 per week. The maximum indemnity period or term is 26 weeks, so half a year. And there is a 30-day waiting period. So effectively, someone suffered, again, back to the broken arm, broken leg, they can't work for 2-3 weeks. It's not going to be able to respond to that versus someone who, again, I'm using these horrible things, and I don't want to be so negative, but someone breaks their back. They can't work for 4 or 5 months. Their employer is not able to assist them. They don't have a benefit of work, so they can turn to us and look for some income supplement or income benefit that they can sort of capitalize on. The caveats in this policy are things like you have to be employed, obviously, for the benefit to pay. You have to have been working a minimum of 25 hours per week somewhere, somehow, and be able to prove that. You need to have filed an income tax return with the government so that we can verify, again, the income that has been lost before we can make a payment. Again, burden of proof is on you as the claimant, as is the case with all these sorts of types of insurance. And we work with, or not me, but the insurance adjusters work closely with doctors and other medical professionals to try and help people get back to where they were. But it's not a workers' comp type of policy. So that's what it is. And again, it's a policy that has been pretty popular, I would say, across the country. Again, and it's really in recognition of the lifestyle that we've chosen to be around horses. That clearly comes with some risk. And for those of us that work outside at the barn, We have to be able to go to work the next day and earn our keep at a job. And so if we're injured, then it's a problem. So that WAI is another policy that is offered as an option. The final policy that I'll speak to, sorry, there are two left. One being Tack and equipment. This is an easy one. So the intent of this policy is to cover you for your Tack losses if they should arise during your membership. It's a $10,000 limit. It doesn't matter where you keep the Tack. And the reason we put this policy in place is simply because so many homeowner insurance policies for our urban members, they leave their Tack at the barn. It's not sitting in their basement. Many members assume that their home insurance is going to cover them for that stuff that's left at the barn, and the answer is it might not. I don't discount that some insurers do cover sporting equipment when it's away from the home, but not when it's permanently stored at a space that is not at the home, because the insurance company has no way to underwrite or evaluate that risk. We chose many years ago to recognize that these Tack investments that we make over time, myself included, even though I haven't had a horse for probably 20 years now, I still got a Tack box full of stuff in my basement that's probably worth thousands of dollars. I just refuse to give it up. Does anybody need any bits, by the way? Because I have about 100 of them. And like everybody, I'm a collector of this stuff. But the point being, there's a fairly significant capital investment in these bits and pieces. And so when they're left at the barn, when they're exposed, when they're in a horse show, you know, invariably we lose Tack and equipment at horse shows, sometimes from theft. But the point being that there's a $10,000 policy that again just sort of recognizes the lifestyle choice that you've decided to make as being a participant in the horse industry, recognizing that you may have Tack and equipment that you've invested in, recognizing that it may be somewhat exposed when it's left at the boarding place or when you haul it around at a horse show. And to that end, it's a great way to just protect yourself against the possibility of being lost. So it covers things like fire, obviously, and theft. Those are the things that people often ask about. Does not cover wear and tear. Does not cover when the raccoons get into the tack room and decide to chew on your leather, your bridle and your show saddle, which again, we get asked about every year. Or when rats or mice decide to make a nest in your tack trunk and decide to make a heck of a mess of everything that's there. It's not going to pick that sort of exposure up, but it's certainly a broad policy. So the final policy that I'll speak to, and then we can talk about any questions that you may have, is a travel insurance component. It's not a set policy per se. There was a time when all the provinces, including Horse Council, offered a specific travel policy. Many years ago, when the travel industry started to get into a bit of trouble, travel insurance became really a problem for all of us. So we now sort of just have a relationship with To-Go travel insurance and offer a very high limit of $10 million to members if they choose to take advantage of it. There's a link to a special sort of platform on the To-Go website from Horse Council's website or from our website. It recognizes, and this is why it's important, but it recognizes the inherent sort of risks associated with being involved with horses. So if you do horse show in the United States, or if you're fortunate enough to horse show in Europe, the policy can be used as a way to protect yourself against those out-of-pocket expenses that won't be covered by BC Health, which can be significant. And with the exception of rodeo, bronc busting, and bucking bulls and so on, every other sort of equine discipline is covered. For the few that aren't, there's actually a supplement that can be purchased so that if there is an injury arising from those more dangerous activities, that the policy will still respond. And we all know about travel insurance. I'm not going to lecture on that or talk about it particularly. Certainly in these days, the question of COVID comes up a lot. You know, whether or not any travel insurance company is willing to put up money from related to COVID-related losses. I can tell you that literally today, and that's quite coincidental, but today To-Go announced that they now have a COVID option that they are offering to their community, to the clients that choose to do business with them. It's a $500,000 limit specific to COVID. But that will satisfy a lot of the entry requirements necessary in foreign countries, because most foreign countries have either sort of shut out Canada, which is unfortunately the case right now for us in Europe. We were on a very favorable list until our numbers started to go up again. But when that starts to get tamped back down, I'm sure that customers or people across the country, probably including myself, will choose to travel again. And it's inevitable our destination countries are going to want us to prove to them that not only are we healthy before we enter their country, but that we have COVID related insurance, so that if we become ill in their country related to COVID, that we've got something that will protect us, and if necessary, help with our extrication from the country and back to Canada, because they don't want to be dealing with us for the next 6 or 8 months in their hospital beds that might be needed for their own citizens. So there's a patriation clause, or get yourself out of Dodge and get yourself home. There's a component in that policy that is designed specifically for that. So we've talked about travel. We've talked about the WAI, that weekly accident indemnity. We talked about Tack and equipment. We've talked about the members' name perils or horse insurance. We've talked about the accident, death, and dismemberment policies, both the included and the optional. We've talked about the personal liability insurance. So that's the program. That's the offering that we have. It is available through Horse Council. There are other products that Capri offers that we won't talk about here necessarily, but for coaches and clubs and full mortality policies and farm insurance, all those things that are related to the horse industry. Many of you invariably know us for those other issues. I want to talk briefly just about the benefit of this and the membership. We certainly know over time that many people join their provincial sport organization because of the insurance program. So we share a significant responsibility in making sure that these products are valuable and continue to offer value to the membership. But it's not all that is of value to members. In Horse Council's case, as a member of that community, you are sending or are giving your voice to a much broader audience of all of your contemporaries, the thousands, tens of thousands of members of Horse Council, that gives them a single voice to do the great work that they do. And one of the things that's become so apparent to me in these past 8 months is the advocacy work that Horse Council has been doing with your government in BC to make sure that benefits, that the plight of the horse industry in BC has been heard, because the community is significant. People often forget that as a collective, the horse community in BC and indeed across the country contributes billions, not millions, but billions of dollars to the economy, that we are an integral and important part of the population, that we employ people in the industry, we work in the industry, we gain our living from the industry, we pay taxes from that community, and we deserve recognition from government. And frankly, Horse Council's role, among many things, to develop sport and to manage sport and rider development programs and facility management issues, is to advocate for the community, that voice, to government. So your Minister of Agriculture, your Minister of Sport, your Minister of Tourism, all of which are key roles in the government, hear from a community that is robust. So for anybody on this call that is listening, that runs a facility, for instance, your boarders should be members of Horse Council. Whole host of reasons why, from an insurer's perspective, because you'll know by virtue of membership that they have liability insurance, they have accident insurance that helps to protect the facility, frankly, if there's an incident. But just, and perhaps more importantly, is that notion that that community in your barn is part of the larger community in your region, is part of the larger community in the province that gives voice to government. So it's a very big deal, and one that we're talking about fairly loudly at the moment, because it's evident to me, again, particularly over these last 8 months, just how hard Horse Council has been working for the members to make sure the government hears the plight of what's happened in our industry. Access to public lands, land use issues are significant and long-term goals and objectives and work that's being undertaken by Horse Council. So there's just so much that goes on in that office down in Langley. I hope that everybody on the call will tell their friends, if they're not members, to join. It's an important issue.